In the 1870s in Montana, land was a man's only real hope. Elias Harding knew that better than anyone. That morning, when the floodwaters swallowed his land along the Sweetwater River, he lost not just his crop, he lost his hope. 3 years of backbreaking work vanished in a single night, just like his wife, who had fallen victim to consumption 2 years earlier. Now, he faced another cold winter alone, without a helping hand, without a single soul to stand by his side. What he did that day at the town auction he never thought he'd do. But desperation drives a man to strange things, especially a man who's already lost everything. The town market in Eagle Creek was buzzing with people. Loud bids and laughter filled the air as merchants hawked their wares. In the center of the square, on a raised platform, a gray-haired man was auctioning off a herd of horses. Elias hadn't come for horses. In fact, he wasn't even sure why he'd come at all. Maybe just to escape the loneliness waiting for him back at the farm. Harding stood at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He was 35, but the wrinkles around his eyes and the bitter lines at the corners of his mouth made him look older. Hard work and loss had worn him down. He watched the auction with weary eyes when something unusual happened. Oscar Bailey, the town jailer, climbed onto the platform, leading a young girl behind him. Her hands were bound, her clothes torn and dirty, her tired gaze fixed on the ground. The auctioneer cleared his throat, and the crowd fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special item today. This is young Sarah McAllister, 19 years old. We've had the pleasure of hosting her in the town jail for the past 3 months after she was caught stealing. She can work off her sentence through labor. Strong, healthy, and by court order, she'll serve 1 year. The amount paid for her will go to the town treasury. Elias's stomach twisted at the sight. It wasn't uncommon to sell criminals into labor on the Wild West. But something felt off about this girl. She didn't look like your typical thief. There was no wickedness in her eyes, just fear and maybe a bit of defiance. Starting bid, $20. The auctioneer continued.
25, shouted an elderly man.
It was the hotel owner, known for his fondness for young girls. 30, came another voice. That was Frank Wilson, owner of the town brothel. Elias clenched his fists. He knew exactly what fate awaited the girl if those men bought her. In 10 years, she'd be nothing left of her. She'd end up an old, worn-out woman, all her dreams shattered. $40, he said suddenly, surprising even himself with his voice. The crowd turned to see who had bid. Elias Harding wasn't the type to join auctions, especially not auctions of people. 50, Wilson shouted, staring right at Elias. 60, Elias replied, meeting his gaze. Contempt flashed in Wilson's eyes. 70, Elias swallowed hard. He still had money set aside for seeds. If he spent it now, there'd be no new crop next year. But when he looked at the girl, who lifted her gaze for the first time and met his eyes directly, something stirred inside him. $100, he said firmly. The hotel owner and Wilson exchanged glances, then both turned away. $100 was a lot of money for a servant, even for a year. $100 once, $100 twice. The girl goes to Elias Harding for 1 year. Sold. Elias approached the platform. Bailey untied the rope from the girl's hands, then handed Elias the papers. She's yours, he said. Free in a year unless she runs. If she runs, the sheriff will put out a warrant. Elias nodded, then turned to the girl. Come with me. Sarah followed him silently to the wagon. Neither said a word until they were out of town. The wagon rattled quietly along the dusty road. Elias focused on the horses. The girl sat beside him in silence, staring into the distance. Finally, Elias broke the silence. Sarah McAllister, right? The girl nodded but didn't look at him.
I'm Elias Harding.
I have a farm along the Sweetwater, about 20 miles from here. It doesn't matter where it is, Sarah replied softly. One prison's like another. Elias was surprised by her response but said nothing. Somewhere deep down, he understood her bitterness. Why did you steal, Sarah? The girl finally looked at him. Anger and pain reflected in her eyes. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten in 3 days when I took that bread. But what does it matter to you? Elias pondered. What did it matter to him, really? Why had he bought a stranger when he barely had enough money for himself? I need help on the farm, he said at last. I'm alone. Need someone to tend to the animals. Keep the house in order. Sarah laughed bitterly. And for that, you paid $100. You could have gotten help cheaper. Elias didn't reply. He himself wasn't sure why he'd done it. Maybe because of the look in her eyes. Or maybe because he knew what it was like to be in a hopeless spot. As the wagon neared the farm, the landscape grew harsher. The flood had ruined parts of the fields, and though the water had receded, the marks of destruction were still visible. There it is. Elias pointed to the house looming in the distance. It was a simple wooden structure, a bit weathered but sturdy. Nearby stood a barn and a few smaller outbuildings. The fields were now muddy and empty after the flood. Sarah scanned the property, and Elias saw her eyes widen in surprise for a moment. Maybe she'd expected to be taken to a crumbling shack, not a real farm. Elias parked the wagon, then helped her down. He felt he owed her an explanation. You'll be better off here than in jail, and better than anywhere else. Sarah's face hardened. I know what would have waited for me at Wilson's place. Elias nodded. That's exactly what I was thinking. I still don't understand why you paid so much for me. Elias sighed. As they entered the house, the fireplace was cold. Dust covered everything in a thick layer. The house looked like it belonged to a lonely, broken man. 2 years ago, I lost my wife, he said quietly. I've been here alone ever since. The flood took this year's crop. I was supposed to buy seeds for next season, but now you've spent the money on me, Sarah finished. Elias nodded. I'll figure something out. I always do. Sarah looked around the house. It was small but could be neat if someone cared for it. A kitchen, living room, and 2 bedrooms made up the place. Yours could be the smaller room, Elias pointed to one of the doors. It was my wife's before she died. Thank you, Sarah said. And Elias was surprised to hear the earlier bitterness gone from her voice. Maybe she was starting to see that he meant her no harm. The first days passed in quiet work. Sarah managed the household, cleaned, cooked, while Elias handled the farm chores. They barely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts. On the 3rd day, when Elias returned from the fields, he was greeted by a warm dinner and a clean house. Sarah was in the kitchen, just pulling bread from the oven. I had no idea there was flour here, Elias said in surprise. Sarah gave him a faint smile. I found a sack in the cellar, and some canned goods too. It was the first time she'd smiled, and Elias's heart tightened for a moment. Sarah was young and beautiful, reminding him of what life had been like before everything fell apart. Over dinner, Elias finally gathered the courage to learn more about her. Where are you from, Sarah? The girl set down her fork. From the East, Pennsylvania. My father's farm went bankrupt when he died. Mother remarried. But my stepfather didn't like me. Elias nodded understandingly. You ran away. Sarah nodded. I thought the West would be better. A fresh start, but it turned out harder than I imagined. Couldn't find work, nowhere to live. And eventually, it drove you to steal. Sarah lowered her head. I'm not a thief, Elias. I know, the man replied, and I won't think of you as one. That evening, after Sarah had retired to her room, Elias thought about the future for the first time in a long while. The girl's presence had changed something in the house, like a small light igniting in the darkness. But he knew this couldn't last forever. He'd spent the seed money on her, and if he didn't find a solution, there'd be nothing to harvest next year, and they'd both starve. A week later, Elias went to town to sell the last pair of chickens spared by the flood. When he returned, Sarah was waiting on the porch with a cup of hot tea in her hands. Something wrong? She asked, seeing his face. The man sat beside her on the steps and took the cup. Ran into Wilson in town. He said he'd give $200 for you. Double what I paid. Sarah's face paled. All the good rapport they'd built in the last days vanished in an instant. You want to sell me to him? She asked quietly. Elias stared into the distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky red. I need the money, Sarah. Without seeds, there'll be no crop next year, and we'll both starve. Sarah stood up, the cup slipping from her hands and shattering on the porch. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought you were different, not like the others. But you're the same. I'm just a commodity to you too. Elias looked at her painfully. It's not that simple. But it is, Sarah cried. Either you sell your soul and me with it, or we find another way. There's no other way, Sarah. Believe me, if there was, I wouldn't even think about it. The girl stood there for a minute, then turned sharply and ran into the house. Elias heard the door slam behind her in her room. All night, he couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, wondering if there was another choice. But the truth was, he saw no other way out. In town, he already owed everyone. No one would give him credit, and seed prices rose every day. At dawn, he heard a soft rustle, got up, and quietly opened the door. Sarah was in the kitchen packing a bundle. Running away? Elias asked softly. Sarah flinched but didn't turn. What did you expect? That I'd wait for you to sell me to that pervert? Elias sighed. They'll put out a warrant for you, Sarah. They'll catch you and bring you back. Or worse, you'll end up in jail again. Still better than ending up at Wilson's, the girl replied. Elias approached her and gently touched her shoulder. Sarah, listen to me, there's another way. I never thought I'd say this, but what if you marry me? Sarah turned, stunned. Her eyes widened in surprise. What? Elias was surprised by his own words, but once spoken, he knew he meant them. You heard me. I'll take you as my wife. Then they won't have power over you. You'll be free. And what about you? Why are you doing this? Elias was silent for a moment. He couldn't truly answer that question. Maybe because he'd been alone too long. And maybe because he saw in her the strength he needed to start over. Sarah looked at him distrustfully. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're hardworking. I know you're full of life. And I know you deserve a better fate than the one you've been dealt. Sarah went to the window. The first rays of dawn were just appearing on the horizon. If I agree, she began slowly, will this be just a deal or something more? Elias knew the question demanded honesty, but he didn't want to lie to her. At first, maybe a deal, but over time, who knows? Sarah stood at the window for a long time, then turned. Determination shone in her eyes. Okay, I'll marry you, but on one condition. And what's that? Elias asked. That you'll never sell me, no matter what happens. Elias nodded solemnly. Never. The town preacher was surprised when Elias and Sarah showed up that morning, but he asked no questions. On the Wild West, people often married quickly and unexpectedly. The wedding was simple. No guests. Just the two of them, the preacher, and two witnesses pulled from the street. Sarah wore the best dress they found among Elias's wife's things in the attic. Elias put on his old Sunday suit, which was a bit tight now. When the preacher asked the question, Elias looked at Sarah. The girl's eyes sparkled, but Elias couldn't tell if it was from tears or something else. I do, Elias said firmly.
Ido, Sarah whispered.
And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elias hesitated for a moment. You may kiss the bride, the preacher said. Elias wavered, but Sarah stepped closer, gently touched his face, then leaned in and gave him a short, sweet kiss. On the way home, they sat silently in the wagon, each lost in thought. Elias stole glances at the girl who was now his wife. It was a strange feeling. He hadn't planned his life this way, but somehow it felt right. The sun was setting as they reached the farm's boundaries. Elias stopped the wagon on a hill with a good view of the whole homestead. The setting sun gilded the fields, the house, the barn. All this is yours now too, Elias said quietly.
No, ours.
Sarah gazed at the farm for a long time, then looked at Elias. Her gaze was warm, reflecting some new feeling. Thank you, she whispered. Elias knew she was thanking him not just for the farm, but for freedom, for a new beginning, and maybe for something neither could yet put into words. As the wagon approached the house, Elias found himself thinking about the future. And for the first time in a long while, that future didn't seem so bleak. In the following week, Elias and Sarah slowly adjusted to their new situation. Their marriage was on paper, but in reality, they were just getting to know each other. Elias still slept in the larger bedroom, Sarah in the smaller. They divided the farm work. Sarah kept up the household but now also helped in the garden, planting vegetables from seeds found in the cellar. Elias worked the fields, trying to grow something on the parts spared by the flood. One evening after dinner, they sat on the porch. The night was quiet, stars shining brightly. "Tell me about your wife," Sarah asked unexpectedly. "Your real wife." Elias was surprised but decided it was time to talk about it. "Her name was Mary. We came west together 7 years ago. We were young and full of dreams. This farm was our dream." Sarah listened silently. "We worked tirelessly," Elias continued, "and things were starting to turn around. Then Mary started coughing. First, we thought it was just a cold, but it got worse. Consumption. She fought for 2 years, but in the end, she couldn't go on." Sarah gently took his hand, and so they sat in silence for a while. "Did you love her?" Sarah said at last. It wasn't a question, more a statement. Elias nodded deeply. Sarah squeezed his hand, then stood. "Good night, Elias." Elias sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about Mary and wondering what his wife would say about what was happening now. In the days that followed, something changed between them. They talked more, spent more time together. Sarah shared her story too, how she grew up in Pennsylvania, lost her father, and how her life turned to hell with her stepfather. Elias understood why she'd been so distrustful at first. Life hadn't treated her gently. One morning, Elias woke with a decision he'd been mulling over. He hitched the horses and rode to town. When he returned, he brought a small package. Sarah was working in the garden when he arrived, looked up and smiled at him. But the smile faded when she saw his serious expression. "Something wrong?" she asked worriedly. Elias shook his head, then pulled the package from his pocket. "This is for you," he said, handing it over. Sarah unwrapped it curiously. Inside was a simple but beautiful gold ring. She looked at Elias in shock. "I thought if we're husband and wife you should have a real ring," Elias said, a bit embarrassed. "Bought it in town from Jennings the jeweler." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She took the ring and slipped it on her finger. "Fit perfectly." "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias cleared his throat. "Well, I just wanted you to have a proper ring," he said, then turned toward the barn. Sarah called after him. "Elias." The man turned. Sarah approached, stood on tiptoe and softly kissed him. This kiss was different from the wedding one. Longer, deeper, with a promise in it. That evening, as Elias went to bed, he heard a soft knock at the door. Sarah stood there in her white nightgown, moonlight illuminating her figure. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said quietly. Elias's heart raced. "Are you sure?" he asked. Sarah nodded, and Elias moved over, making room for her in the bed. And that night, their marriage, which started on paper, became real. Autumn brought cold and rain. The crop Elias tried to save was meager, but the vegetables Sarah planted grew well. "Winter will be tough, but we'll make it somehow," Elias thought. On a stormy November day, Elias was working in the barn when he heard hoofbeats. He looked out and saw 2 riders approaching the house. One was Wilson's man, whom he'd seen in town. The other was Frank Wilson himself. Elias hurried to the house. Sarah was in the kitchen kneading dough. "Riders coming," Elias said. "Wilson and his man. Go to the bedroom and lock yourself in." Sarah paled but obeyed. Elias grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Wilson and his man stopped in front of the house. Wilson greeted Elias with a mocking smile. "Harding, what a pleasant surprise. Heard the big news. Congratulations on the wedding." Elias didn't respond, just gripped his rifle tighter. "You know," Wilson continued, "I've been thinking a lot about why you turned down my offer. $200 is big money for a man who's lost everything. But then I realized you kept the girl for yourself. Clever move, Harding. What do you want, Wilson? Elias asked coldly. Wilson dismounted and stepped closer. I still want the girl. Now I'm offering $300 for her. You're talking about my wife? Elias replied. She's not for sale. Wilson laughed. Your wife? Don't make me laugh, Harding. Everyone knows you married her just to keep her. Name your price. 500. That's my final offer. Elias raised his rifle and aimed it straight at Wilson's chest. Get off my land, Wilson. Now. Wilson's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this, Harding. No one turns me down without consequences. With that, he turned sharply, mounted his horse, and galloped off with his man. Elias lowered the rifle with trembling hands. He knew this wasn't the end. Wilson wasn't the type to give up easily. When he entered the house, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen. Her face was pale, but her eyes showed resolve. What did he want? She asked. Elias didn't want to scare her, but he wouldn't lie. You, he said simply. Sarah nodded, as if she'd expected it. What do we do now? Elias approached and hugged her. Don't worry, he said. I'll protect you, I promise. But both knew the danger hadn't passed. Wilson was influential in town with long reach. That night, as they went to bed, Sarah pressed close to Elias. He felt her trembling and knew it wasn't just from the cold. Elias, Sarah whispered in the dark. I love you. Elias froze. He hadn't expected this confession, especially now in danger. But lying there, holding his wife, he realized he felt the same. I love you too, Sarah, he whispered back. And I won't let anyone take you from me. In the following week, Elias was constantly on guard, getting up at night to check the farm and always carrying his rifle when working. In mid-December, when the first snow fell, new visitors arrived. This time, it was the sheriff with 2 deputies. Elias's heart sank as he saw them approach. He knew it wasn't good. Sarah, he said quietly, go inside. Whatever happens, don't come out. Sarah wanted to protest, but seeing Elias's face, she obeyed. Elias grabbed his rifle and stepped out. The sheriff dismounted and approached with a grim face. Elias knew him. Bill Parker had been Eagle Creek's sheriff for 10 years. He was known as a fair man. Elias, the sheriff greeted. We need to talk. About what, Bill? Elias asked, though he suspected the answer. Frank Wilson filed a complaint. Claims the girl you bought is his runaway wife. Elias's heart skipped a beat. That's a lie. The sheriff shrugged. Maybe. But he showed papers that he says prove Sarah McAllister is legally his wife from Pennsylvania. Elias shook his head. Sarah's my wife now. We were married by the preacher. It's all legal. I know, Elias, the sheriff replied. But if Wilson's papers are real, his marriage came first, and yours is invalid. Elias felt anger surging. Wilson's lying. Sarah was never his wife. The sheriff sighed. Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions. Give me a week to sort it out. I'll send a telegram to Pennsylvania to check Wilson's claim. In the meantime, be careful. Wilson's not the type to back off easily from what he wants. Elias nodded. Thanks, Bill. The sheriff and his men rode off and Elias went inside. Sarah stood in the doorway, and from her face, it was clear she'd heard everything. Wilson claims he's your husband? She asked in a trembling voice. Elias hugged her. He's lying, Sarah. You know that, but the sheriff will sort it out, and in a week, the truth will come out. Sarah buried her face in his shoulder. I'm scared, Elias. What if Wilson wins? Elias couldn't answer that. Instead, he just held his wife tighter. In the days that followed, the tension was almost tangible. Elias barely slept, constantly watching the farm's surroundings. Sarah withdrew, as if afraid she could lose her new life at any moment. On the 7th day, as Elias was chopping wood in the yard, he heard hoofbeats. It was the sheriff, alone. Elias set down the axe and hurried to meet him. The sheriff's face was grim, and Elias sensed something was wrong. What is it, Bill? He asked. The sheriff dismounted and handed Elias a paper. Got a response from Pennsylvania. Wilson's documents are fake. Sarah McAllister was never his wife. Elias sighed in relief. I knew it. But there's more, the sheriff continued. Sarah McAllister's real name is Sarah Jennings. Her father wasn't a farmer. He was a jeweler in Philadelphia. Elias looked at the sheriff in surprise. A jeweler's daughter. The sheriff nodded. Her father died last year, but not from a bankrupt farm. He was murdered. Her stepfather killed him to take his fortune. He wanted to kill the girl too, but she ran away. They've been looking for the stepfather since, but he vanished. He went west and took a new name, Elias finished. So he wouldn't be found. The sheriff nodded. Yes, and now I know why Wilson wants the girl so badly. The stepfather is none other than Robert Wilson, Frank Wilson's brother. He probably sent word to his brother that the girl was here. Elias felt a cold rage wash over him. So he wants Sarah to hand her over to his brother. The sheriff looked at him seriously. Elias, the girl's in danger. Not just from Wilson. The Pennsylvania authorities are looking for her as a witness in the murder case. Elias's mind raced. What do I do? The sheriff handed another paper. This is a subpoena. Sarah has to testify about her father's murder. If she does, she can go free, and we can stop Wilson from ever getting near her. Elias looked at the house. I need to talk to her. Entering the house, Elias saw Sarah already waiting. Fear was etched on her face. What happened? She asked. Elias sat her at the kitchen table and told her what he'd heard from the sheriff. Sarah's face grew paler. So you know, she whispered when Elias finished. You know who I really am? Elias took her hand. I know you're my wife, and I know you're in danger. But now I understand why. Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. The truth is, my father really was a jeweler. My stepfather was his assistant and always envied my father's success. When mother remarried him, father took him into the family business. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. He killed your father, Elias said quietly. Sarah nodded. One evening, when he thought he was alone in the shop, he broke into the safe. Father caught him and they fought. The stepfather killed him. I saw it all because I walked into the shop right then. I ran before he could harm me too, but I knew I couldn't stop. I headed west, took a new name and tried to disappear. But now he's found me. Elias squeezed her hand. The sheriff says you have to testify. It's the only way to get rid of him for good. Sarah looked at him in horror. I can't, Elias. He'll kill me if I go back. Elias stood and went to the window. In the distance, the sheriff still waited. You don't have to go alone, he said resolutely. I'll go with you and won't let anyone hurt you. 2 days later, Elias and Sarah set out for town. The sheriff sent a special carriage, escorted by 2 deputies. The plan was for Sarah to testify before a judge, then send it by telegram to Pennsylvania. As they neared town, Sarah grew more nervous. Elias held her hand, trying to calm her. It'll be okay, he said. The sheriff's men will watch over us. Sarah nodded, but her fear was almost palpable. Arriving in town, they went to the sheriff's office. Bill Parker was waiting and led them to his office, where an elderly man Elias didn't know sat. Elias and Sarah Harding, this is Judge Henderson, the sheriff introduced. He'll take the testimony. The judge nodded, then addressed Sarah. Miss, are you ready to testify? Sarah looked at Elias, who squeezed her hand encouragingly, then turned to the judge. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Over the next hour, Sarah detailed what happened that evening her father was killed. How she saw her stepfather, Robert Wilson, breaking into the safe. How her father caught him, and how Wilson killed him with a heavy metal object. She told how she fled and tried to start a new life in the West. The judge wrote it all down, then had Sarah sign the statement. Now we'll telegraph this to Pennsylvania, he said. In a few days, they'll respond, and we'll know what further steps are needed. Sarah and Elias were just about to leave the sheriff's office when the door burst open. there stood Frank Wilson with a pistol in hand. "Nobody move!" he shouted. The sheriff reached for his gun, but Wilson was faster. "No, Parker, hands up or I'll shoot." The sheriff reluctantly complied. "Wilson, this is madness. Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." Wilson laughed. "Too late, Parker. Little Sarah here's said too much already. But no matter, her testimony won't reach Pennsylvania anyway. Sarah, come here," Wilson ordered. Elias stepped in front of Sarah. "She's not going anywhere, Wilson." Wilson's pistol now aimed at Elias. "Out of the way, Harding, or I'll shoot." Elias didn't budge. "Sarah's not your property anymore, Wilson. She never was. And now she's my wife. I won't let you take her." Wilson's eyes blazed with fury. "You don't understand the situation, Harding. This isn't your decision." At that moment, a shot rang out suddenly. Wilson staggered. The pistol dropped from his hand. Behind him in the doorway stood one of the sheriff's deputies with a smoking gun. Wilson collapsed to the floor, blood seeping from his shoulder. The sheriff rushed over and cuffed him. "Frank Wilson, you're under arrest for attempted murder and threatening an officer," the sheriff said. As the deputy led Wilson away, the sheriff turned to Elias and Sarah. "Sorry for the incident, but at least now you're safe. Wilson will be in jail for a long time, and your testimony will get to Pennsylvania." Sarah was still shaking from fear. "What about my stepfather?" she asked. The sheriff looked at her seriously. "Once they get your testimony, they'll issue a warrant for him. And now that his brother can't help him, it's only a matter of time before they catch him." Elias put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff." As they left the office, Elias saw Sarah's face was still pale, but the fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by relief. "Let's go home," Elias said. Sarah nodded, and as they climbed into the wagon to return to the farm, she felt for the first time that she was truly going home.